Okay. So once that gets started, I'm going to go ahead and welcome everybody here. All right, there we go. All right, so good evening. Hi, everyone, and welcome to this evening's presentation. My name is Judy Kitt. If you don't know me, I'm the president of the Foundation for Mind Being Research. I know that there are some people, there's always some people who join us who've never heard of us before. So I just want to let you know that FMBR was founded almost 42 years ago now by scientists and artists and healers who were interested in exploring human consciousness through the lens of science, spirituality, and ancient wisdom traditions. We are seeking to provide resources to help people explore, discover, and apply wisdom so that they can live with a greater sense of peace and understanding and awareness. I encourage you to check us out at fmbr.org. You can also see all of our past presentations on our YouTube channel, which is FMBR TV. They're all up there for free, so check us out. And if you subscribe to the channel, you'll get a little notification when we're live, so you won't miss anything. So we're really honored to have John Bodine with us this evening. John is a life coach specializing in addiction recovery, post-traumatic stress, and trauma-informed transformation. His clients most often use entheogens, plant medicine, as tools in aiding their transformation. John helps them to prepare for the extraordinary experience, and more importantly, to integrate the experience. That's where the real work starts. And then identify and implement necessary changes that will benefit them on their path toward a more fulfilled and loving life. So John wanted this meeting to be in a meeting format instead of webinar so that we could really have a conversation. He'll do a short presentation and then we can talk. So if you're watching on YouTube and you have questions, just type it into the chat. Mary will text it to me. And if you have a question on Zoom, you can unmute yourself or feel free to put it in the chat as well. So John, good evening and welcome. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you, Judy. Pleasure. I'm happy to be here. Thank you. And for those of you who are joining on Zoom, if you feel so inclined to take yourself off of video, I appreciate that because it's nice to see faces and see who I'm chatting with. And if you don't feel comfortable, that's also completely okay. Yeah, so welcome. And I really appreciate each of you for taking the time out of your life to be here. When I examine my life and I say, what are my limited resources? I see that my limited resources, the only limited resources that I've come up with are time and energy. And you are taking both your time and your energy to be here. And so that says that this is important to you. And so thank you for being here. I really appreciate that. I'm going to read out the mission for FMBR. And I will say, this is my first introduction to FMBR. And, but I took a look at the website and I was struck by the mission. Our mission is to expand the context for scientific exploration to include our interconnectedness with the universe. Our purpose is to lead people to self-empowerment in order to create positive change for themselves and the planet. In our research programs, we explore a more encompassing view of the nature of the universe, one that includes both the physical and the non-physical aspects. In our education programs, we share this expanded worldview with our membership in the community, locally and worldwide, via the internet. We create partnerships that foster innovative solutions for the challenges that are facing the world today. What I hear in that is connection, right? That's to me, like, if I was to say, what is the one thing that kind of stands out? It seems like it's connection. It's connection to me. It's connection to others and connection beyond the self. right? Connection to the universe, our planet. Who am I? What am I doing? Why am I here? How can I help you? It seems it's about connection. And that's something that struck me as like, wow, this interconnectedness. And so our talk today, we're going to be speaking a bit about microdosing. And we're talking here specifically about microdosing entheogens or plant medicines, God generators, generating the God within, right? Or sometimes referred to as psychedelics. And sort of what type of connection does this create? So before I start, and I literally have a 5-slide, 100-word presentation. I used to build presentations and I don't anymore. And so it's light on presentation, heavy on conversation, because to me, the conversation is where the magic happens, and that's that connectedness. A little bit about me. I was born and raised here in the Bay Area. I studied mechanical engineering and then got my master's in business. I worked for eBay for 10 years or so, doing marketing. But along the way, I realized that there was something that was lacking in my life. And there was a period of time where my addiction was depression. And I say that as like, it's an addiction. It's the unconscious use of something, of a chemical, to change how I feel. In this case, the chemical or the molecule was lower serotonin, lower dopamine, increased cortisol, and increased adrenaline, which creates the sensation that I called depression. And I was doing it unconsciously through my thoughts. It wasn't necessarily through a glass of wine or a syringe filled with heroin, but it was through my thoughts. And that changed my experience of the world. Later, after 10 years, I was fired from eBay, and I thought, I want to do something that I really care about now. And what I really cared about was changing my own experience of the world and helping others change their experience. And so I stepped into a role as a life coach, helping people with transformational life coaching, transformation of their life. And most of my clients are people who experience addiction, either addiction to a heavy substance such as heroin or methamphetamine or alcohol, or post-traumatic stress. So for a significant period of the last 6 years, I've worked with veterans who have experienced post-traumatic stress, mostly special forces veterans like Navy SEALs. And I've worked with people who are just looking to like, I want a little something more from this. And I don't know what it is, but I want a little more from this life. And I'd like to say that eBay filled my wallet and this fills my heart. And I will take this every day now because this feels good. Because I'm selfish. I want to do things that feel good. Yeah. So before I begin, are there any questions you have for me? And I'm going to type questions down and make sure we get to them.
And feel free to unmute yourself. I'm not going to call on people. So if you have a question, just jump in. Because I can't see everyone.
Yep.
Hi, John. Good to see you.
Hi, Jennifer. Nice to see you. Happy Tuesday. All right. Well, if there's no questions, I'll start. It's a short presentation. What we're talking about today is microdosing. Specifically, microdosing as a tool to change our experience. And from that experience, from that new understanding, perhaps everything changes. All right. And so I'm going to share my screen, portion of my screen, share. Judy, how's that look?
Looks great.
All right. So about microdosing, literally about microdosing in 6 slides and less than 100 words. What is it? What are we talking about? What we're talking about is taking a subperceptual amount of an entheogen. And when I say entheogen, I mean drug or psychedelic or neurotransmitter, right? Because that's really what we're talking about. We're talking about something that looks like a neurotransmitter, such as psilocybin mushrooms or LSD. And there are people who are microdosing other substances as well. San Pedro cactus is one of them. And then there are some research chemicals that people are taking that looks very similar to mushrooms or LSD or different phenethylamines or tryptamines. But that's primarily what we're talking about. So subperceptual dose, which means the greens are still green in the same amount of green. By that I mean, if you are taking a more than perceptual dose, maybe the lines start to get wiggly, or the greens get a little brighter, or the clouds get a little magical. All right, and what we're talking about here is a subperceptual dose. We want to be just under that amount so that your reality, as you experience it, doesn't radically shift, that you'd be able to drive a car and navigate your way around a barbecue and get the food on the table, but you're not going to burn yourself. Right. So what this typically is this typically about 1/10 of a traditional dose. So in the case of LSD, that would be about 10 micrograms. All right, a typical dose of LSD would be 100 micrograms. And so 1/10, so about 10 micrograms. Or in the case of psilocybin mushrooms, the 2 most common microdosed entheogens, that would be 0.1 to 0.2 grams. Right, 1 gram of mushrooms is perceptual. Right, it's not a full dose necessarily, but it's perceptual for sure. And so we would typically take 0.1 to 0.2 grams. So that's 1 small capsule. All right. The pharmacology of this is what I think is very fascinating. So on the left here, what you see is serotonin, and you see this carbon ring, and then another ring next to it, hydroxy unit off to the side, and some other things. I'm not a chemist here, so I can't really speak to this too much, but that's serotonin. And then if you move one to the right, you see psilocin. Psilocin is the active ingredient in psilocybin mushrooms. Psilocybin converts to psilocin in your body. And you see the same ring structure, all right? Only here the hydroxy unit is shifted 1 position over, and then there's this arm that it has as a slightly different end to it. And then LSD has the same structure as well, only it's a lot more complicated. All right, can you see my arrow, Judy?
Yeah.
Okay, like all of these additional parts, right, make it a little bit more complicated. And then on the far right, here we have something called N,N-dimethyltryptamine. This is a molecule that is actually an endogenous tryptamine. It means it's already in your body. There is evidence that it is in your lungs. There's a hypothesis that it has a role in the pineal gland. All right, the pineal gland is this funny gland in the middle of our brain that we really are just learning about. There's a book called The Spirit Molecule that explored the use of DMT or dimethyltryptamine in humans. But you see it's got really the same ring structure in the same arm, but like just a nitrogen out here instead of a nitrogen and two hydrogens. All right, but they all share this structure to serotonin. And what your body sees in this case is they go, oh, I know what to do with that. I'm going to plug that right in where the serotonin plugs in. I want to name serotonin. We think about this as a brain thing, and it's not just a brain thing. There is certainly serotonin receptors in your brain, but there are also serotonin receptors throughout your body. In fact, most of the serotonin in your body is produced in your gut, and there are serotonin receptors throughout your whole body. So when we're talking about taking entheogens or psychedelics, it's more than a mind thing. It's a somatic thing. It's throughout the entirety of your body. And there's a vibration that happens. So the pharmacology of this really says, what we're talking about is what happens when we take a neurotransmitter, take an excess neurotransmitter, and plug it into our system. So how do we do it? Typically, microdosing is done with a protocol, right? Some sort of a protocol. And the reason for this is to limit the amount of the product that you're putting into your body and over a specific time period. All right. And this is to limit the stimulation of these receptors. We don't want to overload them. We don't want to hammer on them all the time. All right. The typical microdosing protocol with psilocybin mushrooms would be something like a 4 days on, 3 days off. With LSD, it's a little different because that LSD molecule means it has a longer half-life in your system, and it binds more strongly to your serotonin receptors. And so what we want to do is we want to give your body this product and then let it clear it out before we take more. Right. And so with LSD, it would be every 4th day. So 1 day on and 2 days off. And that gives your body a chance to like experience it, clear it, find baseline before you experience it again. And so it's a little different than when we're taking something like an antidepressant, where you're going to be giving yourself this antidepressant all the time, right? Most antidepressants have a half-life of 24 hours, which means 24 hours later, half of the product is still in your body working. And then you take the next dose, right? And you're trying to find a baseline with that. I think it's very fascinating, and I'll speak to this in a moment after I go off presentation, of how antidepressants, sort of the mechanism they're going after versus microdosing. I'll speak to that in a moment. So why do we do this? What people have found who have microdosed, they're finding they have greater connection with both people and the planet and themselves. They're noticing levels of reduced anxiety, reduced depression, increased creativity, increased focus. We could add things like reduced story about why something can't get done, or why I shouldn't do something, or why my life is the way it is. In many cases, it's like I have a longer fuse. And if you have a longer fuse, it means before that spark hits the dynamite, you have that opportunity to cut it off. Right? You can stop it before you go into reaction, which means if you're not in reaction, you're maybe in response. I believe that our reactions are automatic, conditioned, right? From our upbringing, from our stories, from our past, and that our response is what actually comes from our heart. And I had a woman once tell me my reaction wasn't very interesting. She's like, your reaction is not very interesting. And I would love to know what's underneath the reaction. And I'm going to come back in a little bit to talk about that if you're ready, right? But your reaction right now, it's not very interesting. In fact, it's kind of funny. And she was 100% right. She was absolutely right. My reaction wasn't very interesting. Here's some resources. And I'll share this link with Judy and she can post it somewhere. The top one here is James Fadiman. He's actually, I believe, lives in the Bay Area. And he's been collecting information on microdosing, primarily LSD. And he's got a site where people can submit their anecdotal information, right? What they've found. And then there are some journals that are just starting this, right? We are in this new phase of psychedelic research right now. We'll say the war on drugs, which I believe personally is a war on people, and largely put an end to research about psychedelics. And this goes back to the 60s, when we sort of made many of these illegal. It stopped research in this. And so research right now is just starting. The best example of this is the MAPS organization, or the Multidisciplinary Association of Psychedelic Studies, who has been doing research with something called MDMA to help veterans and first responders who experience post-traumatic stress. And so far their studies, and they're in phase 3, they're wrapping up phase 3 right now, and they have about a 75% success rate of resolving post-traumatic stress. Meaning if a person, an individual takes the standardized test to determine if you have post-traumatic stress, after 3 sessions with therapy or with a coach, basically counseling in between, after 3 sessions, they no longer qualify as someone who is experiencing post-traumatic stress. Let me say that again, 75% success rate. That rate what it includes is the people that dropped out of the study, which means the number is higher for the people that did this. In the case of veterans right now, 22 veterans a day currently commit suicide. There are more veterans who have committed suicide than died in the Gulf War, Afghanistan, and all the recent 22 years of war combined. Largely because of post-traumatic stress. So, these drugs do not kill people. Nobody dies from LSD. Nobody dies from taking mushrooms. The lethal dose of mushrooms and the lethal dose of LSD are far beyond what anybody could take. Nobody dies from them. And it's entirely possible that people are saved from them. People's lives change. I'm going to stop the share here. And I'm going to say one other thing. There was a book that was published this last year. And this is not, I want to be clear, this is not to make this political. But there was a book that was published this last year by Hunter Biden, President Biden's son, who struggled with addiction. And in his book, he talks about his addiction, and he talks about taking two things. One of them is Ibogaine, which comes from a plant from South Africa called Iboga, which is also, it's in this similar family. It's not a classic psychedelic, right? But it is an oneirogen. It's a dream creator, right? It's a 24-hour journey where you go into your own past and you watch your life unfold like a flip book. And he took that followed by something called 5-methoxy-dimethyltryptamine, 5-MeO-DMT, which is often found in the secretion of a toad from our wonderful United States and also northern Mexico. And he credits in his book that those two things are the things that catalyzed him to change and let go of the addiction that he experienced. Which means that we are in a shift. We're in a transformation phase right now where these things are being studied and they're being used to change people's lives. All right, to let go of addiction, to let go of post-traumatic stress, to feel general happiness and connection. And all we're doing is playing with neurotransmitters. We're just shifting what's happening in the brain. We're using the chemistry of the brain in the same way that an antidepressant uses the chemistry of the brain. What an antidepressant does is it says, we believe serotonin is good for happiness. So let's let the natural serotonin play longer by not taking it back in. I'm going to stop the pump that brings it back in. This is what a traditional antidepressant does. It says, don't take the serotonin back in. Let it play longer. When we're talking about microdosing, we're just saying, don't worry about the pump. Let me just give you something that looks like serotonin. Let me just give you more of the thing that feels good. Now, serotonin, there are a number of different receptors that serotonin plugs into. One of them, from the most common, or most commonly talked about, is the 5-HT2A serotonin receptor. And the 5-HT2A receptor is responsible for reducing inflammation in the body. So if you give yourself something that plugs into that receptor, you are naturally, or not naturally, but you are adding something that reduces inflammation in the body. And what are the things that do that? Well, the things that most commonly antagonize that receptor or plug in are psilocybin mushrooms, LSD, and other entheogens and psychedelics. Another common receptor is the 5-HT1A receptor. And this one, what we know about it is it's instrumental in reducing anxiety and depression. So when we start plugging into this receptor, we can help reduce anxiety and depression. I want to be clear really quickly. I don't think these are magic bullets. I don't think anything is really a magic bullet. And I'm not a big fan of this idea of like, oh, just take this for the rest of your life because that'll take care of you. When we're talking about things that, and I don't want to really say illness, but I'm going to use the term because it's the common term of mental illness, things like depression, anxiety, post-traumatic stress. One of the people that I follow his teaching would be Gabor Mate, and he would say addiction, and I believe all of these are addiction. I believe depression is an addiction. I believe anxiety is an addiction. I believe post-traumatic stress in some ways is an addiction, right? And Gabor Mate would say, they all have a root in trauma. And you can eliminate the addiction, but you are still left with the trauma. And until you go look at the trauma, you will struggle. Right? And so what do these do? Is these can be tools to provide a sense of ease and well-being and give you the strength and ability to go in maybe perhaps and look at those things and let go of the grip or the control that they have. So
I have a question for you, John.
So what questions do you have? Hi, Judy.
Do you find, I have a couple, but do you find that the microdosing is helpful in healing trauma, like, the PTSD or anything like that? Or does that need like a full dose session?
For which now again?
For recovery, from like a full-on addiction or something like that. Do you find that the microdosing works, or are these like kind of full dose sessions that are required for that kind of?
That's a great question. So microdosing absolutely can work for it, because it's like giving yourself a break. And I want to be very clear, I'm not an opponent of things like antidepressants. I think antidepressants can give a person that breathing room to navigate their life for a period of time when things are a little out of control, right? And it's like, okay, now let's do the work. And that's what microdosing can do. For many, like, I have a sister who 2 years ago, or just over 2 years ago now, her house was involved in the Camp Fire up in Northern California. And while the fire didn't burn her house, it literally licked 3 sides of the house and burned the rest of her property, including her workshop and outbuildings and things. And she called me and she said, I'm really struggling. And I said, okay, well, how about microdosing some mushrooms? And she started microdosing, and she calls me a week later and she says, John, am I really allowed to be this happy? I said, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And I have countless stories like this. A veteran that I'm currently working with, he's the one that I got the short fuse or the longer fuse story from. He's like, it gives me a longer fuse. I don't blow up at things that I used to blow up at. Right. And so microdosing can be that tool that we can find. And everything is really just a tool. Alcohol, it's a wonderful tool to numb pain. Alcohol is a wonderful tool to numb pain until it's not wonderful. Until all you do is numb because that's the tool you found. Right? So microdosing can be this tool to help you find a little more space, a little more breathing room, and a little more connection. Think of it as like training wheels, right? It's like if you're learning to ride a bike, you put the training wheels on until you get your balance. And microdosing can be that.
Vaishali wants to know are we in the second renaissance of these medications?
I think so, absolutely. First of all, there are a number of companies that are now publicly traded on the stock market. So one of them called MindMed, they're looking at microdosing LSD as a treatment for Alzheimer's and dementia. I'll say that again. Microdosing LSD is a treatment for Alzheimer's and dementia. Right. I'm working with someone right now, early onset Alzheimer's. He's in his 60s. He's been microdosing LSD now for about 2 years. Don't ask him ask everybody around him what the difference is.
Mm.
And everybody around him says, oh, he doesn't get lost noodling on his guitar when we're at a party. Like, I can have a conversation with him. His wife says, oh, I can give him a list of things that I want done around the house today, and I can go to work, and when I get home, it's all done, instead of finding him in the garden staring at a pile of leaves or something. Right? And so what these do, so all of these entheogens that we're talking about, psychedelics, they are neuroregenerative. They promote the growth of new dendrites, new nerve tips, which means new nerves. They also light up the brain in a different way. And so if you're learning something with the brain completely lit up, you're learning it across multiple pathways. And so if one of those pathways fails in the future, you still have the ability to know how to do that because you've got backup. Right. So I believe absolutely we are in this renaissance. There are companies that are researching this, such companies such as MAPS, right? And publicly traded companies now that are looking at this for their own reasons.
Well, and this research that's coming out, I think is so encouraging, that these substances are being legalized. They're no longer, there is less and less stigma around them, right? And they're being used in really kind of traditional Western settings because they're so effective, right? You said 75% reduction in PTSD. In my previous life, I did clinical research in a biotech company. And if we had a study that showed a 75%, success rate,
it's gold.
We would shut down the study and immediately apply for, approval, because there becomes a time when it is unethical to keep doing the study if you've got such a strong signal that it works and is. Yeah. And so so by Charlie, I think we really are in this renaissance.
Yeah, I want to be clear, and again, not to make this a political conversation, but the research on this was largely shut down around the time of the Vietnam War by Richard Nixon with the war on drugs. And I personally believe the war on drugs has been a war against people. And all wars against drugs are wars against people. And if you have people protesting the physical war that you are fighting in another country, and those people are taking mushrooms and LSD, one way to stop the protest is to make the LSD and the mushrooms illegal.
Yeah.
And that's largely what happened. Again, nobody dies from mushrooms or LSD. It doesn't happen. Right. In the 60s, there were hundreds of researchers in the Bay Area using MDMA with their research. MDMA, street name ecstasy or Molly, right, is an incredible entactogen. It means touchy-feely. It feels good, right? It opens your heart. It's not a classic psychedelic, right? But it is a serotonergic medicine. It releases your natural serotonin. And it's also dopaminergic and norepinephrinergic. It releases norepinephrine, adrenaline, dopamine, or adrenaline, dopamine, serotonin. That's ecstasy. And that's what they're using in the MAP studies. But it also creates a difference in the way your prefrontal cortex communicates with your amygdala. And it shuts down your fear center, which makes it possible through conversation to go into those things that are scary. The microdosing can do some of this as well. I want to kind of steer this back to microdosing. Microdosing can do this as well. It's like, if my anxiety is reduced, then I'm safe in the world. If I'm safe in the world, then I can go to the grocery store during the daytime. Or I can have that conversation with my partner or spouse that might be a little harder, or I can get my work done.
So let's take some of these questions here. Jerry, do you want to ask your question?
Sure, I'll ask it. I was just wondering, you mentioned that the EXD goes away in about 4 days. Does it come back? Is this a lifetime thing on microdosing, or you just take it whenever you need it? Or how long do the effects really last for most people? Just curious.
The effects of microdosing?
Yeah.
Yeah, so microdosing, again, I am not a believer that anything is a magic bullet. It's not like setting a bone, right? If you break your arm and I set the bone and we wait 8 weeks and your bone heals, then your bone's fixed, right? And so in some ways, the cast is a magic bullet, right? Setting the bone in the cast is a magic bullet, as long as you just wait. With these, I think it is important to go in and do the work. And so if you are microdosing and you're feeling relief, and then you lean into like, oh, what were the things that I didn't feel good about? Let me do the work there, right? So it has a function of psychological work. And I will say, I'm not a therapist. I'm a life coach. I simply help people. What I tell people is I help people feel more better, right? And that's feeling sadness more better. It's great to feel sadness. I love feeling sad sometimes. I love feeling anxious sometimes, right? But I don't need it all the time. And so microdosing can help if you also do the work. And I've worked with people who they're like, I don't want to do the work. I don't want to go into my past. And they microdose and their whole life changed. And they just keep microdosing, and that's okay, right? With these, one of the nice things about microdosing is there's largely no side effects. I'm working with someone right now who he started microdosing psilocybin mushrooms. He's been on antidepressants for 30 years, and that has largely affected his personal life and his sex life, right? And he started microdosing mushrooms as he tapered off of his antidepressants. And he said, number one, I can have a sex life now, which is wonderful for my partner of 25 years. And I'm not having this conversation laying down on the couch. Like, would you normally be? He's like, I would normally be on the couch laying down. He's like, and my partner has told me that I've gotten more stuff done in the last month than I have in the last year. He's like, so there's this different energy level. So does that help answer your question, Jerry?
No, it does. What it says is that it varies from person to person and their situation. And some will be long-term users of microdosing, some will be short-term. All depends upon the person and getting the life coaching things done and taking care of themselves. So yeah, that answers my question. Thank you.
And this sort of goes into Jennifer's question. Jennifer has a couple of questions, but she said, I've heard that when working with a therapist, they often prescribe larger doses for, sort of longer journeys, right?
Yep.
What is the difference in effect with microdosing versus a larger dose? And do you think someone needs a therapist in order to benefit?
Yeah, so that's a great question. Thank you, Jennifer. I don't think someone needs a therapist to benefit. And the difference, so microdosing, again, is subperceptual. It's like, oh, my day seems a little bit easier. I'm working with another person who she texted me after getting starting microdosing mushrooms. And she said, I don't know if it's, she's like, I don't know if it's really happening or not, but I will say that this is the first day I wanted to get out of bed. And then a week later, she's like, I'm not sure still, but oh my fucking God, this is amazing. Thank you so much. Right? Like,
It's quite the correlation.
Yeah. She's like, I don't know, maybe there's something here. And that's just with microdosing. And this is a person who's really struggled during COVID with depression and isolation and loneliness.
Which is very common right now, right?
Yeah, it's very common, right? So what's the difference between microdosing and a larger dose? A larger dose, or what would be often called a flood dose, is going to be a very strong dose, very strong that you really go inward, right? And I think that's the value of this, is to really go inward. And we don't know what's going to happen when you go inward, but maybe you'll go into your parts of your past. Maybe you can have a conversation with a higher consciousness. Many of these medicines feel like you're having a conversation with a higher consciousness. And if you're going to have that conversation, what questions will you ask? If you have one chance to ask this higher consciousness some questions, what questions will you ask? I think that's the important part. Right?
Exactly. And actually that goes into another question from VC, who says, what about setting intention? And what about sort of the intention part in the front end and the integration part at the back end, that kind of rounding out the experience?
Yeah, so integration, thank you, VC. Integration is, if we just look at the definition of it, it means to bring two things to become one. Two or more things to become one, right? When you integrate flour and sugar, right, and water to make cake, you are making a single thing from these. You are integrating them. And so integration, when we're talking about medicine work, is to integrate the teachings or the wisdom that you receive while you're experiencing the medicine into who you are. For example, some people will have no hesitation at all to pick up something that someone else has dropped in front of them. If a person is walking down the street and drops a $20 bill or their wallet, some people will think nothing of picking that up and, hey, you dropped something. Other people will walk right on by because they haven't integrated that caring, giving, helping, assisting part into their life. Right? If you receive wisdom in a deep journey, you need to do the integration. The work starts when the medicine ends. Right? And so to integrate says to become one with the teaching. I had this amazing journey one time, and I was struck profoundly by this goddess from the ayahuasca world. And as she's presenting herself, I'm like, this is amazing. This is fantastic. And then I start thinking about all the projects that I have to do at home. Like, oh, when I get home, I really need to finish landscape in the backyard, and I really need to patch the hole in the sheetrock, and blah, 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 blah. So what happened? Well, first, I had this opportunity and I missed it because I was thinking about something that wasn't real. I couldn't fix the sheetrock when I was laying down in that yurt. So what's the teaching? Oh, maybe I miss out on the love and connection that's around me when I'm not present. Maybe if I'm playing with my dog, I should put my phone down. Maybe if I'm talking with my girlfriend, I should put my phone down, or I should turn off the television and have a connection and stop thinking about something that's not actually real. And so I've been working on this, working to integrate this, working to put my phone down. It's a process. That's the work. It's the integration, right? To practice doing the things that you know you should do because you've got the message. To practice tying your shoe.
Mm. We have a question about another one from Jennifer. Is MDMA and I think sorry, an LSD or synthetic substances? Are they? Is there a difference between sort of the natural experience of psilocybin and a synthetic substance?
So last I checked, everything comes from Mother Nature. Everything that we have comes from Mother Nature in some way, shape, or form.
Mm.
Every plastic that we have comes from oil, which is natural. And so everything, this Pachamama, she has given us everything. That's the simple answer. The longer answer is MDMA can be synthesized from saffron oil, right? Which is the oil from saffron oil, saffron, I think. LSD can be synthesized from ergot, which is a fungus that grows on rye. In fact, there's evidence that they used ergot in ancient times as a psychedelic, as an entheogen, as a tool for this like consciousness creator. Right. And so are they synthesized? Yes. Are there forms of them that are natural? Yes. You know, find what works for you. Is there a difference? I don't know. I've worked with synthetics and I've worked with naturally created products, and they're all very, very similar.
Hmm. Tim wants to know if you think, or what is the likelihood that religious organizations will mount a backlash against these substances, given the way that they seem to be threatened by plant medicines of indigenous peoples?
Well, I think, so there's, what's it called? There's a book called The Immortality Key. And it's a book written by a lawyer researcher. I think he's a lawyer. And he has never taken any of these medicines, but he was super curious about it. He was curious about religions. And what he landed on through his research is that all religions have a foundation from entheogens, psychedelics. They all root back to psychedelics. But what about religious organizations now? I don't think the religious organizations are going to have the problem, right? In fact, there are many churches now that are starting to form using these as sacraments, right? The Native American church uses peyote as a sacrament. Peyote is mescaline. The primary active ingredient in peyote is mescaline, which is a phenethylamine, which looks a lot like MDMA plus mushrooms combined. It's very heart-opening, and this like deep connection to both self and the universe. It's the same thing that's in the San Pedro cactus, which you can probably go get at Lowe's or, you know, Home Depot.
Mm-hmm.
Churches are already being formed to use these. But who has a problem with them? Well, I think our society largely has a fear about these. And you know, that's a trained thing. We've been taught to be afraid of drugs, but not afraid of drugs that are prescribed, right? And again, these drugs don't kill people. It's not like we are seeing this now very clearly with cannabis. Cannabis is not killing people, right? In fact, a lot of people are finding pain relief with cannabis, sleep with cannabis. Like there's other things. And I'm not saying everyone should go out. I'm not saying everyone should be doing drugs all the time. I mean, it's not what I'm saying. But I'm saying that there are benefits here in these cases, and microdosing as well. right? That we can use these. People are finding tremendous benefit microdosing.
Are there contraindications for people with developmental issues, such as being on the spectrum?
That's a great question. No, the answer is no. The contraindications that you might find are in larger studies, they will likely omit people that are bipolar or have any schizoaffective disorder. And that is largely because they don't want to have to tease that out of their data, right? Suddenly your sample size has to increase, probably exponentially to be able to get clear signal if you include a bunch of people that are on that are schizoaffective, and now you've got basically you've increased the number of factors in your test, exponentially. Mm-hmm. And so they exclude them. What are contraindications? So with psychedelics, and I'll say specifically with mushrooms and LSD, right? The serotonergic psychedelics. The primary contraindications are monoamine oxidase inhibitors, or MAO inhibitors, of which there are very few. It's basically really old school antidepressants for MAO inhibitors. And lithium. And lithium is an uncommon prescribed mood stabilizer, if you will. Those are the two primary contraindications. Some people feel that antidepressants are contraindicated, and there's a study recently by a gentleman named Ben Malcolm, who's a board licensed pharmacologist, and he did a whole study and released a white paper, and he says there's no evidence that antidepressants are contraindicated in a dangerous way with these medicines. They will likely mute the experience if you're looking to have a profound spiritual experience, but they're likely not contraindicated.
Carol wants to know.
In terms of on the spectrum, I've worked with people who are on the spectrum and that their entire experience shifts and suddenly their life is in a different direction.
Carol wants to know, how would the average person know how much is microdosing? I think you said in one of your slides, you gave 0.1 to 0.2 grams of psilocybin, it was, of mushrooms.
Yeah, so if you're talking about with psilocybin mushrooms, it'd be 100 milligrams to 200 milligrams. If you're talking about LSD, it'd be 10 micrograms or so. So 1/10 of a dose. There's another question that someone sent me personally. Are you able to do this legally? If so, how? Right. No.
Short answer?
The short answer is no. And the shorter answer, or the longer shorter answer, is even if you're in Oregon, or even if you're in Denver, or even if you're in Santa Cruz, where you're like, oh no, but Oregon said these are legal. At the federal level, this is still illegal. And so if the federal law enforcement decides they're going to arrest you, you can still be arrested. And I think that this to me is, I think, an area for transformation, right? That why can't I put whatever I want? If I'm not going to harm someone else, why can't I put whatever I want into my body? It's my body. Why can't I do what I want with it? And this bill was parked. There's an assembly or a Senate bill in California proposed by Chuck Weiner, California senator from San Francisco, representing San Francisco, who proposed a bill, and it was parked just 2 months ago. But it would legalize all of these drugs in California. Legalize in California all of these drugs, all of these medicines. Texas has already legalized psilocybin specifically to help promote the research and the healing potential for veterans. It's happening. It's all happening.
It is happening. And I think the larger the body of research that comes out, the more, the argument is made that these are therapeutic agents. John wants to know about gradually ramping up to the size of a microdose, or is that necessary?
Yeah, a microdose is subperceptual. Literally, you will feel, the idea is that you feel nothing, right? That if the greens are a little greener, then you turn down the dial a little bit. You turn down the volume just a little bit. But it's not so much that you won't be able to take your trash out and put a meal on the table and go drive to the grocery store, right? So if it's a little strong, then you turn it down a little bit the next day.
There was a question earlier about organizations where people can get, sort of resources, and you mentioned MAPS. I know that's that's a big one. Are they here? Are they in the Bay Area?
Yeah, MAPS is located in Santa Cruz. Their headquarters is in Santa Cruz.
And they've been around a long time.
They've been around a long time. Rick Doblin has been fighting this fight for 25 years or something like that. And their study with veterans and first responders with post-traumatic stress is basically first of its kind, and it is in phase 3. It is entirely possible that MDMA will be legal as a tool to help with post-traumatic stress by next year, it's phenomenal.
Yeah.
I've worked with probably 50 veterans who would largely no longer qualify as post-traumatic stress and possibly no longer qualify as traumatic brain injury from the use of entheogens.
Wow. Vaishali, do you want to unmute and say, because you said CIIS is doing work with it.
I think Lisa has a question. I saw a hand up as well.
Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Thanks. So when you were talking about microdosing for psilocybin, 4 days on and 3 days off, does it build in the system? So is it progress? Are you feeling progressively whatever the effects would be up through the 4th day, and then you?
It's a great question. So typically a drug is considered, so if we look at any drug anything that you put in your body has a half-life. And the half-life, for example, the half-life of nicotine is 2 hours. So if you watch the smokers go out to the smoking lounge, it'll probably be about every 2 hours. It's the people that arrived at 9 are there at 9, and then they're at 11, and then they're at 1, and they're at 3, because half of it is out of them. And so that's the biggest drop, right? And so then they're back out. So 2 hours is the half-life for nicotine. The half-life for psilocybin or psilocin is about 4 hours, right? The half-life for LSD is a funny one. It's got the half-life is about 6 to 7 hours, but it stays active in the receptor for about 12 hours, right? And so call it an active half-life of 12 hours. To be considered off of a medicine, for a medicine to be clear from your system, modern medicine says 5 half-lives. So an antidepressant that has a half-life of 24 hours, if you stop taking it today, after 5 days, it's effectively out of your system. That doesn't mean that your system isn't still finding a new balance and that there are other things happening in your system, but the medicine isn't out of your system, right? So with psilocybin or mushrooms, with a 4-hour half-life, 5 half-lives would be 20 hours. So by the next day, it's out of you. It's not active anymore. So with mushrooms, you can microdose more frequently without a buildup of tolerance. Without a buildup but there is a tolerance that happens, right? And so that's the idea of taking a break. And so some people do a 4-3, meaning 4 days on, 3 days off. Some people do a 5-2. Some people do every other day, right? With mushrooms, it's kind of like find what works for you. With LSD, if you took it today, it's got, let's call it a 12-hour half-life. That means 60 hours later, it's out of your system. That's 2.5 days, right? And so if you took it again tomorrow and again the next day, there is a buildup. And so there's a buildup, but there's also a rapid tolerance. And so it makes it harder and harder to feel the effect, although it's happening because it's subperceptual.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's a great question. Thank you.
Jennifer wanted to know the best method for administration of microdosing. She said
Fried chocolate, but it's hard to measure.
It's hard to measure, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think the best, the absolute best would be to get mushrooms and then grind them up and then put them in capsules that are weighted. There's a gentleman named Paul Stamets who he's got a Stamets stack. So Paul Stamets is a mycologist that has been studying mushrooms for a long time. And another mushroom that he recommends is something called lion's mane. Lion's mane promotes the growth of the myelin sheath, which is the protective coating that surrounds your nerves. And psilocybin promotes the growth of new nerves. So the combination promotes healthy nerve growth. Right. He also adds something, he adds niacin. I don't think it's necessary, and I think he largely doesn't think so either, but we can chat about that later. But I think the most effective way would be to grind up mushrooms and measure them out. But psilocybin mushrooms lose potency when exposed to air. All right, that will degrade the mushroom, the potency of it. And how quickly? About 50% in 1 month. And so what you want to do is you grind them up and capsule them quickly, or you only grind up what you need to use in like 1 week. So that would be, I don't know, less than a gram per week, half a gram. And then it's about a 1/16 of a teaspoon is about 100 milligrams. 1/8 of a teaspoon is about 200 milligrams. But, you know, a good scale is your friend.
Mm-hmm. And then what about the protocols for microdosing? Says, so I hear you say 4 days on, 3 days off, but how long should that last? And is there a break between cycles that's necessary?
People say run it for 3 months and then see, like take a break. If I'm working with people, I say try it for a month and don't tell me each day if today is better. Don't think of it in the day. Think of it as a look back. At the end of a week, look back at the week and tell me what's changed. Can you find an example of like, oh, I would have lost my mind about this and I didn't. Oh, I had more patience here. Oh, I got more stuff done, right? But think of it as a look back. And try it for a month and then take a break. And then
yeah, so it's sort of tested for yourself.
Yeah, I mean, again, all the evidence says this isn't hurting people. And I know someone that she's been microdosing LSD for probably 3 years now. I know, and actually one of my best friends has been microdosing LSD for about 3 years, largely for pain, largely to manage pain. He has a history of addiction, and opiates are out of the question for him. He's like, I know where that will go, and that will go right into my old story of addiction.
Yeah.
And so he microdoses LSD and to manage his pain. And that is all it takes. Again, reduces inflammation in the body.
So the question is, where do you get this stuff?
Hi, Carol. It's a great question. Unfortunately, this is all illegal. And what I will say is, in most states, it's not illegal to order spores for mushrooms. Unfortunately, it is in California. It's illegal for you to have spores for research purposes in California.
Oh, wow.
California and like 3 other states. Some people go out and forage. There are lots of mushrooms that are psychedelic that you could forage. And if you're going to forage, you need to make sure you get the right ones because you don't want to die. Mariah's like, yes, don't die. Yeah, you know, and yeah, this is the $50,000 question. Where do you get this stuff? Because unfortunately, we are in a time and age where people are still going to jail for both possession and distribution of these healing tools, these medicines.
Yeah, it's going to take the legal system a while to catch up, I think, to the promise of these medicines and their medicines, right? Vaishali, do you want to unmute and say something about, so that you mentioned the California Institute of Integral Studies is also doing research, right? Did you say about?
I just wanted to know if John knew of California Institute, CIIS.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. So CIIS, a wonderful university organization that is largely doing all of the training for the MAPS psychologists for their PTSD studies. And that is now expanding to other universities to become a certified psychedelic therapist, if you will. But CIS is the first to do this, and it's fantastic. Yeah.
Yes, it is. It's wonderful. And I wanted to ask you one final question. Any herbs to take along with this, just to help the body when you're on these? I know you can't say it as you're not a doctor, but just generally herbs that just balance the body with this.
The nice thing is, what happens when you take these is your body says, oh, I've got more serotonin. Great, I know what to do with serotonin. I plug it right here, right? And so it's not like you need something you're not depleting anything, right? A difference, one, and the jury's out on this, but if you're taking MDMA, right? And again, you would not microdose MDMA because of the way that MDMA works. What MDMA does is it tells your natural serotonin to come out and play. It releases your natural serotonin. And it tells that pump not to take it back in. So now you've dumped, basically you've emptied the pitcher of all of your serotonin into your system. And serotonin takes some period of time. We actually don't know. Here's a wonderful thing that we don't know about science. We don't know how long it takes to replenish your serotonin. We know it's important. We know it's important for mood stability and happiness. We don't know how long it takes to replenish. So when you lose your serotonin, right, when you dump it out, in the case of MDMA, it takes some period of time to replenish. And there you can take serotonin precursors, something like 5-HTP is a serotonin precursor. And so people take that often after they take MDMA. Some people with with MDMA is, it is a form of amphetamine, methamphetamine. It's not meth, but it has a methamphetamine component to it. As such, it is a stimulant, and people get a jaw clenching and sort of a heart racing and a stimulant quality to it. And to reduce some of that, some people take magnesium, right? And so there are things that people take while they're taking that to reduce side effects. We'll say when the Mythhoffers, the Dr. Mythhoffers, the husband and wife team, when they were asked about this at a conference, someone said, what do you do about these? What supplements do you give to avoid jaw clenching, to avoid, to get good sleep, to avoid the Tuesday depression that sometimes follows after MDMA? They looked at each other and then they looked back and they said, we don't have that problem. In our study, we don't have those problems. So they don't have the Tuesday depression that some people experience after taking MDMA. They don't have such an issue with the jaw clenching. And to me, I read that as A, I got to get what they got, and B, how are they doing it? And what they're doing is they're doing it in smaller doses, and they're doing it in the daytime, right? And if you get good sleep, you're not depressed 2 days later. But if you stay up all night long, you're gonna have a depression. You're gonna have a crash a day later. It's kind of how it works.
Thank you.
Don't do drugs. I'm kidding. Do drugs. Just do good ones.
I think there's a whole, I know that there are people who, like you, are trained as integration coaches, right? Because the reason for doing this really is the integration part, is the healing part, right? And you talked early, at the very beginning about connection, and really, I think separation is this awareness of separation, or the feeling of separation, or the separation upon which most of our society is built, is the ailment of our time, right? And what we're doing with FMBR, and what so many people are trying to do, is wake up from that dream of separation to remind us that we really are all connected, that we're all connected to the natural world and the divine world, and that there's the potential for just a greater experience of being human and being alive. And that's kind of the bigger picture, right?
I think so. I think I was on a call the other day at training, and I said, what if the point of all of this isn't to make meaning of it, but it's actually just to feel all of this, to feel happiness, knowing that it goes away, to feel sadness, knowing that it goes away, to feel depression, to feel anxiety, to feel joy, to feel sorrow. Like, none of it's permanent. And what if this is just this grand experiment that we get to experience all of these wonderful things, and that maybe we could shift our perspective to just collect experiences. I'm just a collector of experience, specifically emotional experiences, or the sensations that I call emotions. I mean, more accurately, like, I experience sensations, and I call those sensations, I have emotion words that I call them. But the truth is, I experience sensations. There's a bubbliness in my belly, and sort of a fluttering in my heart space, and a dropping in my shoulders, and a relaxation, and I call this happiness. That's getting closer to the truth. Mm-hmm. And what if it's about connection to all of that? And connection, when someone shares, that I feel connected. Part of the reason I appreciated those of you that joined on video today. It feels I'm connected, right? I mean, if we back up and say, okay, well, let's just talk science. We can talk science for a moment. First law of physics says energy can't be created and it can't be destroyed. It's the first law of physics, right? Which means there is the same amount of energy today as there was when the universe was created. If energy can't be created and it can't be destroyed, it's the same amount of energy. Which means there's one unit of energy in the universe. One energy. Now, energy can change form, right? We can go from kinetic to static, and heat can be changed and these things. So we can change the form of energy, but it's still one energy. It's the one amount of energy. And you're part of that, which means you are that because it's just one. So you're everything. Right? And our ego says that we're separate. And sometimes that's really important because that keeps me from stepping in front of a car, right? Because my ego says, oh, I'm actually separate from this car, which is really good because that car will change my energy, right? It will change it. Right? And so sometimes it's good, but sometimes it gets in the way, right? If I can really let go of this separateness and move into connection with myself, connection with others, stop controlling, start relating, to just be. What is it like to just be? I like to say the mind is a wonderful meaning maker. It's good for making meaning of things, but it's also a wonderful meaning maker. The mind is very mean, or it can be. I'm not a good person. I didn't do that well enough. I'm so clumsy. I should work harder. Why don't I accomplish anything? You know, what's going to happen next? It's nonsense. For most of us, the reality is we're pretty safe. We're okay. Everything's fine. So far, for everybody on this call, here's the newsflash for everybody on this call. To this point in your life, everything has worked out. It's worked out because you're here. Now, you might not have worked out the way you wanted, but that's your story. That's a different thing. But it's worked out because you're here. Great. Sometimes it's easier, sometimes it's harder, sometimes I have to put work in, but it's worked out. All right. So that means you have no evidence that says it's not going to work out. So why are you worried? Well, because what if the tree falls down? I don't know. Then you'll deal with that. If a tree falls in your house, you'll deal with it. I don't know if it's going to happen or not, but I'm not going to spend a lot of time worrying about it because that's a lot of energy that seems exhausting.
So there's a question here about if the interest is in better understanding oneself and being in tune with emotions, is it better to microdose or do a larger guided journey?
So I can't say what's better or worse. A microdose is going to be more subtle, right? Smaller doses are more subtle, and but people can find tremendous value. I mean, these people that I've worked with, this veteran who's been microdosing mushrooms, he's like, it gives me a longer fuse, and that longer fuse gives me time to examine myself and make little shifts, and so I don't blow up at work, or I don't lose my mind with my girlfriend and like hang up on my brother or whatever it is. I have a little bit of time to like, oh, I'm being triggered. Oh, that's going to be my reaction that I don't need to do. Oh, okay. What's underneath that is I feel like I'm being put down. I can address that. I can have a conversation about that. Right? So that can happen on a microdose. And it can happen on a macro dose as well, on a macro dose with a sitter, or with a therapist, or a facilitator, or coach. You could go into much deeper things. I sat with a group, I attended a retreat in Costa Rica with some veterans, and one of them really struggled with safety. And specifically, the anxiety level on this guy was like through the roof. And he's like, I don't know what safety feels like. Or he's like, I don't know what safety is. I'm like, well, safety is a feeling, first of all. Safety isn't knowing the doors are locked and the windows are closed. That's not safety. Safety is a feeling in your body. So maybe you ask the medicine tonight, what does safety feel like? And this, we were working with flood doses of ayahuasca. And so he asked the medicine, what does safety feel like? And at the end of the night, he was bouncing off the roof. He's like, oh my God, that's what safety feels like? That's incredible. I know what safety feels like now. I'm like, right, now don't forget it. Don't forget it. Because now that you know it, you can find it. Now that you know what it feels like, you can find it again. It's always there. Mm. So they serve different purposes, but they lead to the same path. In the same way that meditation leads to the same place. Right? Meditation, I owned a flotation tank for about a dozen years. So I have a couple thousand hours in a deprivation tank or flotation tank. It's all the same. Meditation is all the same. If you ask any of, go ask Jack Kornfield or any of the great Buddhist teachers, it's all the same. It's all the same.
So thank you. I'm going to ask you one last question, and that is, as we wrap up, where would you point people if they want to get more information, if they want to just explore this topic further?
Well, Ruth Patrick mentioned the San Francisco Psychedelic Society, and there are a number of different psychedelic societies in the Bay Area. So there's one in the South Bay that's a smaller group. The San Francisco Psychedelic Society has some great resources and great classes. If you're just curious about the studies that are going on, you can just search for psychedelic research. Do a Google search on that and you'll start to find lots of different companies. You will start to see a lot of information right now about ketamine and depression. I'm going to say I don't put ketamine in the same class and family as what we've been talking about today. It's a little different. It's not considered a classic psychedelic. It's more of a dissociative, whereas psychedelics are associative. They're connectors versus disconnectors. And I'm not saying there's not value in ketamine, but the MAPS organization in some of their research is quite wonderful.
Say again what MAPS stands for, Multidisciplinary?
Association of Psychedelic Studies.
Okay.
Yep. And I'm going to put my name in the chat, and I'll put my email as well. And I will say that if I don't get back to you right away, ping me again. It's just my life. And that's another place if you just had specific questions, and I'm happy to answer for you. There's a lot of information and resources and research being done on all of these. And I think it's a fascinating time that we are living in, that we're leaning into these tools. And you mentioned at the beginning, these indigenous tools. Mushrooms, if you're looking for something, if you want an interesting read, go onto the Psychedelic Times, and it's at psychedelictimes.com or something like that. Let's see here, I'll put a link into it. It's a timeline of psychedelics. There's a link in the chat. And it starts about 5000 BCE with frescoes of a mushroom holding shaman depicted in caves in the Tassili Plateau of southeastern Algeria. 5000 BC. So why were they depicting this shaman with mushrooms all over him? And then it just progresses from there. This ancient wisdom. And if any of you have ever done a full dose of any of these, it's like having a conversation with a higher intelligence. It's not, people are like, oh, you're just tripping, you're seeing things. No, it's as real as this. And it's not like I'm seeing things. Maybe it's more real than this. Maybe there's wisdom in there. Maybe it's like the deepest teaching. So
that is a really wonderful place to end, unless anyone has any more questions. If you do, speak now. And
save it for the after party.
Oh, okay. One quick question. Can you compare the differences between ayahuasca and psilocybin?
They're very similar. They're both in the tryptamine family. They both last 4 to 6 hours. They're very similar. I find ayahuasca to be a little more earthy, and I don't know a better way to say that is. It just seems a little more earthy, and it's a little more feminine. And ayahuasca is typically a she medicine. There's a female spirit to ayahuasca, and mushrooms would be typically called los niños, or the sacred children, and often have a coyote spirit, or what's called a coyote spirit, which is a little bit of a trickster or a prankster energy. But mushrooms can be, they're both incredibly profound teachers and healers, but similar, same family, both in the tryptamine family. And if you look at that slide that I showed, well, here, I'll bring it up again. Let's see. Share screen. So this right here is psilocin, right, with this little hydroxy unit right here. This is psilocin, or mushrooms, and this dimethyltryptamine, you can see it's exactly the same minus this hydroxy. This is what's in ayahuasca. So these two, mushrooms, ayahuasca. Now ayahuasca has another medicine in it as well, chacruna, which is an MAO inhibitor, which is a natural antidepressant. But it potentiates that medicine and allows the DMT to get into your body, but very, very similar, right? The molecule is almost identical, and almost identical serotonin, which I think is just fascinating. Oh, maybe what if we were just tinkering with neurotransmitters?
Mm-hmm. Well, at the rate that the research is coming out, I think, like you said, we're in really a very exciting time. And I'm really grateful to you for spending your time and for offering us your expertise and your perspective here. I think it's been really illuminating. And yeah, I just want to thank you. I want to thank you for being here.
Well, thank you, Judy, and thank you, everybody, for your presence and your participation and your questions.
Yeah, so thank you, everyone. I want to wish you a happy solstice and a Merry Christmas. I know Diwali and Hanukkah are well over. So happy solstice, Merry Christmas, Happy New Year, and we will see you early in 2022. Okay, thank you, everyone.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thanks, John.